The one thing that I will say, and I think this is a really important point regarding Northeast Tyro. Northeast Tyro is spectacular. Maybe that's probably a little bit too aggressive an adjective, but it is very, very special. It's unique in the Southwest US. You don't get grades and widths like that at that shallow depth. Normally, anything that exists like Northeast Tyro is already a hole in the ground. It isn't available for us to discover. And I think that you got to put that in context with everything else that we've done around the property. Where we have what would be really good holes, and particularly you look at 30 meters at just over 2 grams that we just put out from Tyro main zone, and there's half a dozen holes of 30 plus meter, maybe not half a dozen, yeah, half a dozen holes with 30-meter intervals of plus 2 grams in the Tyro main zone, which are very good intervals, especially when you consider that they're all within 200 meters of surface. And so this is both the opportunity and the challenge of communicating the message around gold chain, or Black Dyke, where we hit 30 meters at a gram and there's a few holes pending still. You've got this really spectacular zone that is going to carry, eventually when we get there to economics, it's going to carry a lot of those economics, simply because it is so good.
For disclosure purposes, our site does not make recommendations for purchases or sale of stocks, services, or products. Nothing on our site or this podcast should be construed as an offer or solicitation to buy or sell products or securities. All investing involves risk and possible losses. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. For disclosure purposes, West Point Gold Corp is a paid-for client on the InvestorIdeas.com website.
Derek, it's great to have you back on the show. More drill results out besides 600 meters, I think, if that's correct. Everything is out and assays we can talk about. So talk to us about the news release that came out today.
Yeah, so this morning release sort of the last holes from Tyro, primarily from the Tyro main zone. So that's some pretty good results in there. Continue to hit kind of in the upper part of the Tyro main zone, hit another good swath of 2-gram material. Interestingly, in that hole, kind of the highlight hole there, we hit another stope. This is not something it's an odd occurrence for us. This is a past producing mine and 100 years old, so the records aren't that great. But that hole was interesting, right? You've got over 30 meters of plus 2-gram material, but we hit a 2.8-meter void in that where the stope was. And on the edges of that stope, we got high-grade material. For those of you who've been following along for a while, very similar to what happened in hole 34, hit a historic stope, had high-grade material on either side of the walls, and then went and drilled underneath it and had success under 34. Not necessarily saying we're going to have that same success under 138, but I think the potential exists.
Can you talk to us about the difference in the gold system that you're seeing from the Tyro main zone and then the Northeast Tyro, now that you have kind of the full picture from all these drill results?
I would preface this by saying we don't have the full picture yet. Both zones are open at depth. Both are open along strike. I think there's more gold defined on both parts of it. But I think the big difference between the two systems is the intensity of mineralization. In Tyro Northeast, the zone is spectacular. We have significant mineralization. It seems to be the intensity of the mineralization, it seems to be higher. Obviously, the gold content is higher at Northeast Tyro, whereas at Tyro Main Zone, don't see the same intensity. Obviously, the grades are a little bit lower. And then what we do see in both zones that I think is important is that we're seeing multiple gold deposition events. And so when you have multiple gold events and multiple levels of where the boiling zone was moving during mineralization. And so that's kind of what we saw that a little bit in Northeast Tyro. Remember, 47, 48, and 49, we had this high grade zone, we produced this high grade zone, and then grades got a little bit lower beneath that. And then we drilled underneath that and we hit some more high grades again. We haven't drilled as deep at Tyro Main as we have at Northeast Tyro, but what you see there is we had some really good gold mineralization. Obviously, some of the deeper holes here were a little bit weaker, but still show very good, still look like upper level mineralization. So it doesn't appear like we're out of the zone. So our view is that because we've had, the boiling zone was moving during mineralization, there's an opportunity the potential at Tyro Main Zone is still open at depth, much like Tyro Northeast is.
For anyone that is new to the story and has not seen all the other podcasts, do you want to talk about like some of the best results that you came out with on this 21,000 meter drill program at the Tyro Main and Northeast Tyro? Because there's some pretty spectacular ones.
Yeah, there are a number of spectacular holes, particularly at Northeast Tyro. I mean, this program started in September 2025. We've had good results up and down. I think the best hole that we drilled in Northeast Tyro and the best hole of this program was 66 meters at 6.5 grams. That is a spectacular hole, especially considering it's only 300 meters from surface. And that's what really opened up Northeast Tyro and gave us that idea that we had multiple boiling zones. And the one thing that I will say, and I think this is a really important point regarding Northeast Tyro is spectacular. And that's, maybe that's probably a little bit too aggressive an adjective, but it is very, very special. It's unique in the Southwest US. You don't get grades and widths like that at that shallow depth. Normally, anything that exists like Northeast Tyro is already a hole in the ground. It isn't available for us to discover. And I think that you got to put that in context with everything else that we've done around the property, where we have what would be really good holes, and particularly, you look at 30 meters at just over 2 grams that we just put out from Tyro main zone, and there's half a dozen holes of 30 plus meter, half a dozen holes with 30-meter intervals of plus 2 grams in the Tyro main zone, which are very good intervals, especially when you consider that they're all, within 200 meters of surface. And so this is both the opportunity and the challenge of communicating the message around Gold Chain, or Black Dyke, where we hit 30 meters at a gram and there's a few holes pending still. You've got this really spectacular zone that is going to carry, eventually when we get there to economics, it's going to carry a lot of those economics simply because it is so good. And then you've got all this other stuff, which is still very good, just not quite as good as Northeast Tyro. Internally, we can say that Northeast Tyro casts a long shadow. 4 kilometers away, we hit at Black Dyke, 36 meters at a gram from surface, and the market kind of yawned. Well, everywhere else in Southwest US, that is a good hole. 4 kilometers from Tyro, So Northeast Tyro, it's okay. And I think that's definitely something that, when we look at this system and the opportunity that's here, we're just scratching the surface as to what we've done at Tyro main zone and Northeast Tyro. And when we do that resource update in the fall this year, we will just be at the beginning of what there is to find at Gold Chain.
I imagine this has given you a lot of confidence, and the team a lot of confidence going into your MRE later this year.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, 21,000 meters of drilling. You have to keep in mind that, we've only got about, in the whole property, there's about 27,000 meters of drilling and 21,000 meters into Tyro itself. And so when we started this program, we only had just under 10,000 meters of drilling in total. And so, yeah, we've learned a lot with a 20,000 meter program, and obviously advanced the project significantly with a lot of those results. And I think with any kind of program like this, you gain some, you lose some. Obviously, Northeast Tyro surprised positively, both at depth and along strip. Obviously, there's some areas that we would hope would have had some higher grades. But I think overall, based on what we know today, I think we have confidence going on that maiden resource. We're of the view that the resources has the potential to be a mine. And I think that that's a great starting point when you're, talking about a maiden resource after, less than 30,000 meters of drilling.
Again, for anyone that's new to the show or hasn't seen all the other podcasts with us, for that possibility of the mine, do you want to just walk us through the great land package that you guys have, like all the benefits and upside of obviously being in the US? A lot of people know, but just walk us through like the project and all the infrastructure, etc.
Yeah, so the drill results we've mostly been talking about, where we've done most of our drilling, is a target called Tyro. And so there's 2 parts of Tyro main zone and Northeast Tyro. And we've had some spectacular success there. And obviously that's why we focused a lot of our drilling in those areas. And that's where we're going to deliver a maiden resource. However, there are kind of 3 styles of targets on the property. So Tyro is actually, we're only drilled off about a 1.2 kilometers worth of strike. That's what's going to end up in the maiden resource. But Tyro itself is actually a 3.5 kilometer long structure broken up by some post mineral faulting. And so there's South Tyro, there's what we call East Tyro, which is not really east, but it fits in the right spot there, which are pieces of this structure that have been kind of broken up. And so those are targets that we pursue. Then there's what we call the Banner Sheep Trail trend. And so this year we had success in 2 places on that trend, Black Dyke and Sheep Trail, both kind of plus 30 meters, plus 1 gram a ton intercepts, starting to wrap our heads around what we think could be a small resource there. That being said, they won't be in the maiden resource when they come out. But that's a 15-kilometer trend, and it extends all the way up from Gold Chain Hill through Black Dyke, goes through a target called Banner, then there's Sheep Trail, and then it goes down to the kind of makes a turn in Sheep Trail. Very interesting target, and heads down to a target called Sugarloaf Peak. So that's a 15-kilometer trend. All good targets. The last, and probably one of the most interesting targets, and one we get a lot of questions about, that we think has the biggest potential, is the Frisco Graben. And so there's a 12-kilometer set of structures. About 4 kilometers of it, there's two structures are pulled apart. the Frisco Mine Fault and the Union Pass Fault. Where those two structures are pulled apart, we have a 4-kilometer long by 750-meter wide target called the Frisco Graben. It's a down drop block. Early evidence, previous drilling that we've done in 2025 hit some anomalous gold, elevated levels of mercury. Seems like we're on the right track. Geophysics looks like there's something there. And then this year, two things that give us further confidence is Tyro and Northeast Tyro. That structure extends into the Frisco Mine Fault and appears, we believe potentially extend beyond it. And so that's an area where we're going to be chasing in the follow-up drill program. The other thing that we did this year is we hit at a target called Bull 8. So not in the Frisco Graben proper, but up about 6 kilometers away from the Frisco Graben, in the very kind of northwest corner of the land package. We hit 21 meters at just over a gram. Again, in the context, it is one drill hole, so we don't know if we're stringing something together there. But the fact that those major structures host gold is what gets us excited. And so, we have a big land package that's with lots of targets. And while we are going to focus on Tyro and make sure that because that's the easiest place for us to add ounces in a hurry, we need to keep testing these other targets because I think there's an opportunity to find a lot of gold on this property, I believe.
You mentioned in your press release and just now about the upcoming drill program, probably sometime in September or the fall. Do you want to talk to us about the targets?
Yeah, we're starting to work on that. It is a work in progress. Discussion has been around roughly 30,000 meters. Still need to firm up exactly where all those meters go, but things that we definitely want to test and things that are important for us to test as part of this process. First and foremost is obviously we're going to be back at Tyro, particularly Tyro Northeast, right? Even when we put out the maiden resource, Northeast Tyro will be open at depth and open along strike in both directions, northeast and southwest. And so we'll be chasing it deeper and chasing it along strike towards the Frisco Graben. And so I think that's an area that will be important. As I mentioned earlier, Tyro Main Zone, will be testing that to depth as well because we still believe that that's open. As we look out at the other targets on the property, certainly Sheep Trail is really interesting. We hit 32 meters at a gram is the highlight hole from that program. Hit some other, kind of, 1 gramish type material, but Sheep Trail is interesting because it was the highest grade mine in the Oatman district when it operated. So almost 2 ounces a ton when it was mined. Now that was 100 years ago and it was hand sorted. So, maybe take all that with a little bit of a grain of salt, but we have 15 plus 10 gram samples from surface there. And I can tell you, we haven't been able to replicate those high grades in drilling. And so there's something to unlock there. And we're going to obviously we probably need to drill some more holes to figure that out. Additionally, we look out to Black Dyke. Again, had success there, 36 meters at a gram. Got a few more holes to come from that, but I think that's an area where there's definitely going to warrant some follow-up drilling to see. Obviously, we talked about Bull 8, 21 meters at a gram in this year's program, something that we can chase up and follow up. But I think probably the big one that we're going to go after this year, and it probably won't be in this program, so our drill program will be September to May, September 2026 to May 2027, will be the Frisco Graben. And I think there's an opportunity there. We want to give the Frisco Graben a good test in this program because I think if we hit there, it has sort of home run potential.
Very exciting. Back of the envelope math, it sounds like with this gold system, your recovery rates that you showcased at the beginning of this year, it's a very undervalued story at current.
I mean, I think so, but I'm the CEO and I'm paid to say that.
Derek, as we come to the close, key takeaways for anyone that's maybe missed the show or anyone that has been following along, what do you really want them to pay attention to and remember from this show?
I think the thing to take away about West Point is that in our Gold Chain project is that we have a very large scale prospective project with a lot of blue sky. We're going to have the maiden resource out, which I believe has the potential to be a mine when it comes out in the fall of this year. But that is certainly far from the end. As just discussed, we have lots of targets out there to go test, and I think that there remains a lot of discovery potential on this property.
Any conferences coming up or anywhere that investors can come meet you face to face?
We'll be in Beaver Creek in the fall of this year, and so look forward to meeting with everybody out there.